Aluskewicz. And so Patty, I'm going to let her introduce herself. Patty's a dear friend. She does an awesome job. She has a Scrum Power Hour that meets regularly. And if you haven't joined that, we'll get a link to that so that you can join up and join that. But Patty's going to talk to us about getting past the fear around experimentation. So let me stop sharing. All right, Patty, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Mark, for that warm welcome. And I just have to say publicly, you are not the B team. No B team here. You are awesome. You did come to my Power Hour last week, so some of you folks might have been there. And I interviewed Mark, and he has some incredible things to share about his journey. But let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. And we will get moving here. All right, so of course I have to ask, can everybody see? Are we good? Okay, super. All right, well, I'm excited to be back here for the third time to the Scrum Masters of the Universe. This is part 2 of a talk that I gave in November of last year. And like last year sounds like such a long time ago, but it was just a few short months ago that I came to this group and I was talking about experimentation from the perspective of being a science teacher. So have no fear if you have not seen the recording or if you were not able to attend. I'm going to do a quick recap of some of the ideas that we talked about in November and then add on to the conversation. So I'm excited to be here to introduce some new and unique ideas to you today. All right, so the title of the talk, How to Get Past the Fear Around Experimentation. And of course, this is your teams experimenting with their work in their organizations. So some of you may remember this slide from last time. How many of you beat this Agile drum? Maybe it's all the time. Encouraging, evangelizing for your teams to experiment and fail fast. Maybe you hear people in your organization beating this drum. And of course, that's part of our job to evangelize. We encourage them to try new things, stop doing things that don't work, do things that are different. But we constantly come across a struggle. And this is the teams struggling with experimentation. And they will come up with every reason why they can't do it. You know, the product owner writes the user stories for us, so we have no say. You know, that we have a constant fire hose of work on us, we have no time. Like whatever the reason is, they will come up with it and they will push back on you. But when you dig past all the surface level stuff, this is the crux of it. This is the root cause. People are afraid. And I love this picture, not because we want to be in this position, but this really illustrates it so well. It brings us back to when we were kids, when we made a mistake and, you know, maybe it was raising our hand in class and our classmates laughed at us, or the teacher shut us down, or any adults for that matter, pointing the finger at us. And this causes us to stop taking risks. We stop asking why, and we just learn to do what we're told. And it's really unfortunate because as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches and Agile evangelists, we have so much work to do to help people undo this fear. So just another introduction to me if you weren't here last time or are not familiar with who I am. My name is Patty. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. The sun's out today. I have a bachelor's degree in geology. So I'm a super science nerd from Hofstra University. So I grew up on Long Island. And Mark, we talked about accents last time. Yeah, you probably can't tell that because I have no trace of Long Island accent, which I think is okay. But after I graduated, I went to Harvard for my master's in science education, because I was so passionate about science that I wanted to, like I was saying before we logged on here today, run my mouth about it. I'm very passionate about sharing what's going on in the natural world with other people. And I quickly found out that teenagers are not super excited like I am. I had to really figure out how to get them to be more engaged. So I took myself out of the front of the classroom, and all these years later, I realized that I was implementing Scrum and Agile practices into what I was doing on a daily basis. Now, if you were here last time or you saw the video, you heard a little bit about my experiences with that. I was kind of on an island by myself. This was in the early to mid-ish 2000s. Scrum and Agile was not on anybody's radar, except maybe if you lived in Silicon Valley. But I was doing this on an island. So I have a lot of experience with pushback and waterfall, but to be honest with you, I took it to as far as I could and ultimately decided to leave. I went into business with another person. We started with an idea and we built it up and scaled it up to a small business. So I got a lot of experience with business practices, playing the different roles in a business. And all of these things gave me such unique perspective on being a Scrum Master and being an Agile Coach. So I've worked in many industries, many company sizes, and I've ultimately formed my own consulting firm to help individuals and companies overcome the obstacles that they face. And I know you've all been on LinkedIn, you've been seeing kind of what's been talked about with Capital One. And I think that we're getting close to a crossroads where people are starting to question, is this Agile stuff worth it? Is it worth all of the time and money? And I will say it's part of our jobs as Scrum Masters to answer that question as an affirmative, yes, it is worth it. But we may have to look at things a little bit differently and approach things differently, because in the past 20 years, kind of what we have been doing is not working. So I'm here to talk to you about some of that today, how you can show up, well, it's Friday, so it would be Monday, so not tomorrow, but you can show up Monday and change the conversation. So we'll talk a little bit about where we are going wrong with building an experimentation culture. I'll review a little bit the ideas we shared in November. And then what are some unlikely ways to help your teams get past their fears? And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers, and we will wrap it up and get you back to your day. So a couple of things here. I always like to talk about empathy. And the way we gain empathy is to understand other people, understand them from a very human level. Put yourselves in their shoes and understand that people have a hardwired fear about experimentation. Historically, and when I say historically, I mean in the working world as well as coming up through the school system, our measure of success was reproducing somebody else's work. Here's a giant curriculum. Folks, you got to memorize it, spit it back out for a test, get 100, get A's on your report card, go to a good college, get a good job, right? That's at this point, it's probably a myth. It's been sold to us. And in order to do that, we have to understand what is this measure of success in order to achieve these things. And at some point, just tell us what to do. Just tell us how to do it so we don't struggle so much, because otherwise we may fail. And in doing this, people really have very little experience with true experimentation. And I talked about this in my talk last time. As a science teacher, I realized the lab activities that I was doing with my students were cookbook recipes. Here is the exact procedure to follow. We already know what the right answer is. So you got to get the right answer. And if you don't get the right answer, well, you did something wrong. It's on you. And what I've realized as an adult is this is not discovery. I was not training people, so to speak, to discover. what this comes down to is we are training people to reproduce results, and they get penalized if they don't do it successfully. So getting the right answer becomes the only thing that's important. We learn this very early, and this translates out into our working world with just tell me what features to build, just tell me how to build them, what are the metrics we need to achieve, how quickly do we need to get these things out the door, just tell me what to do, because I want to please you so I don't get in trouble, I don't get a bad performance review, I don't ultimately get fired, because that's what people are afraid of, especially now. And we've all seen this, right? Whether we've gotten one of these on our papers and gotten the perspective that we are just not good enough, or we are willing to do whatever it takes to not get one of these. And I think that, you know, I feel empathy for college kids now, because they've worked so hard to navigate how to not get an F so they can get into college now, because it's become very difficult. But the message we get is that failure is not acceptable. So what do we have to game? What system do we have to game? What do we have to do so we never get one of these? And ultimately, we've never been taught to come up with solutions to a complex problem. And that's what we are asking our teams to do. So if we understand where they're coming from historically, we can understand and have more empathy for the fact that they don't even know how to do this, what we're asking them. So the bulk of the presentation today is to talk about how to help teams get past their fears with experimentation. So I have two strategies that I'm going to talk to you about today. One is a little bit of a deepening of an idea that I talked to you about last time in November. And then I'm going to introduce something brand new to you. Brand new, maybe meaning something you might not have thought about before. So, how to get people over the fear of change? Because that's what we're talking about here. They're used to doing things a certain way, and they will all tell you this is the way we've always done it. You are asking them in some cases to do a complete 180, the way they think, the way they act, the way they speak, the way they operate within a team, and to help them become more comfortable with that 180-degree change, you may have to take baby steps, so to speak. Find something familiar in the new thing that you are asking them to do. And I brought up this book in the Power Hour last week, Mark, and I feel like at this point I should be getting some type of kickbacks, because I've been talking about this book everywhere. I'm still reading it. I'm taking notes on it. This is the second time I'm going through it. The library is like begging for me to return it. It's overdue, but this is right up our alley. And yes, this is about embracing change and future-proofing your career. But when I read this and when I'm reading this now, there's Agile written all over this. And Jason Pfeiffer talks about, this is what he calls it, the bridge to familiarity. Building a bridge and helping people safely cross. And I'm going to give you an example before we get to a software team example. We always fear when new technology comes out that it's going to replace our way of living, right? The current one I saw the other day is the robots are taking over. We're all going to be unemployed, right? But human beings have had this fear come up every time new technology was introduced to them. The car, for example. Now, this is going to sound really silly because we are so dependent on cars and it's second nature to us now. But in the 1800s, you got to remember, people were used to riding horses and they had horse and buggies. So this was completely unfamiliar to them. They were afraid of it. And the book talks about it. And I've done some research on this myself. People were afraid of this thing. They liked their horses just fine. And they thought this was like the devil's work. Seriously. As these cars were driving down the road, people would throw rocks at them. Get off of our roads. These are our roads. and they just couldn't handle this change. So what did the automotive industry decide to do? They didn't quit because they knew they were onto something here, right? They saw the future. They had to help the people get over the fears of cars. And I'm going to show you something silly, and you're going to be like, I can't believe this, right? The horsey horseless was one of their very first ideas. Now, this is an old drawing, but you can see this is a car, probably not recognizable to us today, but they actually put a horse's head on it to help people understand that they were still working with horses. It's still okay. This is not the devil's thing. I will tell you, this didn't go very far, but you can see the psychological gaps that the automotive industry had to overcome to sell their product. So what did they do? They gave people baby steps. They named models of the cars after horses, like the Bronco, the Mustang, etc. They used terms like horsepower. This has the power of 100 horses. And I've also read some things about the original purpose of the hood ornament was to have the animal on the front so you could feel like you still were riding the horse. Over time, it became something of, a symbol for the company. But you can see these baby steps help people adopt this new technology. So, are we doing good, Mark? I want to just check my time because, I don't want to lose track of that. So this is something I talked about in my last talk in November. Create a bridge of familiarity, just like the automotive industry did, to experimentation for your software development teams. This is something that most of us, I'm going to speak for most of us, are familiar with. We saw this in school. We probably learned about it, and it's a bridge. And what we talked about last time is put this up on the screen and show this to your team. Do you remember when you learned about this? I know for some of us, it was probably like decades ago, and we're like super old at this point. But let's take a look at this. Maybe deconstruct some misconceptions around it. It's not a linear process. There definitely is some iteration, definitely at the bottom there, we can see it. Have a conversation. Like when I'm talking about experimentation team, this is what I'm talking about. You know how to do this. Have an honest conversation about their fears. Why are we scared to do these steps? Where do we bump up against our fears? And we talked about this last time. A lot of times people are afraid to even ask a question. That is where they get tripped up. And this is where psychological safety comes in, which we'll get to in a moment. But creating a safe environment for people to raise their hand and not be afraid they're going to get laughed at or like booed out of the room is crucial here, because that's the first step to getting all these other things to go successfully. Where are the roadblocks? Are there roadblocks within the team? Are there roadblocks with people outside the team? Is this your opportunity, Scrum Master or Agile Coach, to go outside the team and have some conversations with people? My development team is trying to do this. We are getting stuck here. How can you help us get unstuck, leader or manager or whomever? And as a group activity, have the team take one of their current challenges through these steps. Help them build the muscle to do it. So I thought we'd throw this out here today. Does anybody want to give this a shot? Right? And I'm asking you to like put yourself on the spot here. I get it. But does anybody want to take a current problem, and actually it doesn't even have to be software, it could be any problem, and talk us through this scientific method?
Is this the awkward silence that I read so much about, Patty?
Yep. and people that come to my power hour and people that are my clients, they know that I have no problem sitting here in silence. I've learned to be very uncomfortable with it. And I'll tell you why. Because I've realized that people need time to think. Not only do they need time to think, they need time to find the courage to raise their hand. And that could be a minute, that could be 2 minutes. It really could be. And if I just said, no questions, okay, moving on. I didn't even give people a chance. So I'm helping you out, folks.
I keep looking for raised hands. We're on the lookout.
Can you repeat the question or the prompt?
Sure. Does anybody have a question, a burning question that they can kind of model the behavior of the scientific method with our group here today? Can you take that question and move it through the steps?
Patty, this is Karen Zanetti. I'll share something that happened in a meetup yesterday evening, and they were talking about learning loops, and they were working on their 13th Scrum Master. And, they were saying, well, at a certain point, that 13th Scrum Master is probably just hitting, that team at the point where people are getting it. And so, if you can start out with that first Scrum Master, work with the, senior executives and everyone to get reasonable expectations of exploration and learning speeds. So is that kind of what you're looking for?
That's a great point. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because in being a teacher, I realized there are many different learning styles, different learning speeds. Everybody has different skills and brings different things to the table. So one of the challenges with me being a science teacher, and one of the reasons why I ultimately left, is because I felt like I could not fit every single person in front of me into this box. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't justify it. So I had to, take a step back. But that is a great point, because how can we expect everybody to look at things the same way, think about things the same way? We're all different.
But I mean, how could you have worked with that first Scrum Master and the executive or whoever was making the decision, that led them to the 13th Scrum Master? How would you apply this to a scenario like this? Because, a lot of, I'm sure, Scrum Masters made a lot of good effort, but, I said to someone, it's like you're working with a 5-year-old. You don't just give them a two-wheel, a bike and just sit them on there and say, head out. You've got to have training wheels. You've got to spend time with them. Mm-hmm. So, maybe other people who have experienced this scenario can take it through the scientific method and again address and avoid the impediments of management not understanding the time frames that this all takes. So you're not getting to Scrum Master 13.
Yes. My biggest question here is, how did we let it get that far? how did we get
Yeah,
there?
so I wasn't my, scenario, but it just seemed like it was a good application
Mhm.
for
Right.
this. If someone
Right.
else who's had something similar can take the group through it.
Mhm.
Anybody?
I guess my take on this is like asking the question like why are our clinicians quitting? That we have clinicians who use our application and they're very frustrated and they're actually quitting and going to work for our competitors.
Mhm.
Okay, so going through the scientific method, I would say, well, maybe we need to make it a goal to figure that out. So let's start with some activities like doing some background research, some interviewing some of these clinicians, and come up with a hypothesis, right? Perhaps testing with an experiment, having a UX person sit with these folks, with the team and the UX person sit with this set of clinicians and do some wireframing or some sketching and low fidelity prototyping, analyze the results, draw a conclusion that this new workflow is better for them. It's got the right information. They're not looking at 1,000 patients at once. They see the people on their schedule for that day and they can click and it's all simple. Or no, that didn't help. Actually, they know it when they see it, right? And then they give us the next piece of feedback that helps, that loop that says try again, come up with a new hypothesis. That's kind of where my head went. So maybe others have different thoughts.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example because your team is, brainstorming, they're coming up with an experiment and they're going out and they're doing something. It's not, we're going to kind of just complain or go around this loop of, well, we're just going to keep building whatever's in our backlog and something will eventually happen, right? It'll all work itself out. No, we have to have some honest conversations. What's wrong with what we built, right? That's retrospective. And sometimes we are so focused on getting the work out the door that we don't have those conversations. But I always question, are we just afraid to have them? Because we don't want to look in the mirror. So that is a great example. I do want to move on to our next example. So thank you, David, for stepping up, putting yourself on the cliff there and kind of talking us through. But try this out with your team. Like I said, this is a bridge to familiarity. People are familiar with this diagram. Everybody's seen it. Let's go back and look at what we know. And yes, there are other methods for getting work done and doing experiments. But like I said, people are familiar with the scientific method because we learn this in school. And if we find a different method that works in the process, good, switch to it. Awesome, whatever works. My second point that I want to get to is creating a bridge of familiarity with you. When we talk about psychological safety and building trust, these words, I hear them swirling around, everybody kind of says them, but then it's like, what do we even do to get those things to happen? And I always talk about taking personal responsibility, especially as a Scrum Master or as an Agile coach. Like, you have to go first. And sometimes it makes us nervous. We don't want to be that child with the fingers pointed at us like you messed up in front of everybody. But it's learning to take baby steps yourself, to put yourself out there, to share stories with other people. So how can you be vulnerable with your teams, with other folks in your company, and talk about how you personally have gone through some stuff? Because people want to know that it's safe. When you share stories with them, they might see themselves in that story, in you, and it will give them the courage to take a step themselves. Because you've stuck your neck out, like David, right? You stuck your neck out. They saw nothing happen to you. So, okay, maybe we can do this. And I always come back to the hero's journey, because people don't want to just hear about failure. That's discouraging. People want to hear about you have survived something great, and it was really difficult, and you overcame this, and here you are standing here today talking about it. So I talk to, my clients, other Scrum Masters about this. And this is one I just took off of Wikipedia. There's a number of different versions, but basically, you're walking along in your everyday life and you feel called to some type of adventure. And you might feel nervous. You might say, I don't want to do this. There might be some resistance. Some person, mentor, in some cases, it's supernatural force, comes along and says, no, you can do this. Just keep going. So if you follow the loop downward, you go through these challenges and temptations. You're battling something within yourself to overcome this. You have people helping you along the way, but at some point you reach the bottom. You're like, I want to quit. I want to give up. I can't continue. And you're sitting there and you have an epiphany and say, no, I can do this. I can keep going. So some type of personal transformation occurs within you, and you rise out of the ashes like a phoenix, so to speak. And then eventually you come back to the known world, and you can then be a mentor for other people. So this is what we're going to explore in the rest of our time today. So before we kind of do that, what are some familiar hero's journey stories that we've all heard of these? What are some examples? You can put them in the chat and see what we can come up with. Yes, Gilgamesh, absolutely. The Odyssey, absolutely. The Matrix, absolutely. Luke Skywalker. Kay Mathis, you read my mind because we're going there. David and Goliath. I've talked about this story with my Scrum Masters. The Hobbit. So you can see, this is all over what's in front of us. Here are some examples. The Hunger Games. Toy Story. So it's in cartoons as well. Harry Potter. One of my favorites growing up, The Wizard of Oz. Another one of my favorites, Indiana Jones. And of course, Star Wars. So I think that's the quintessential one that folks always talk about. So I thought, let's take a look at this one. Let's take a look at the hero's journey according to Luke Skywalker. What did he go through? And Mark, I'm going to call on you because I know you're a super fan of Star Wars. You brought it up in the Scrum Power Hour last week. So can you take us through this a little bit? Because as you know, I've never seen this movie.
I used to have a lot of respect for you, Patty.
I know. That's why I'm like making a face, because I know it's like the end of the world.
Yeah, so for those, this was episode 4, I think, which was the original first episode to come out in like 1979, 1978. So Luke Skywalker is this young boy who's living on this desolate planet with his aunt and his uncle, just average, everyday, ordinary person. Thanks, Karen, 77. And then something happens to him, right? So he has some increased awareness. He goes to buy these 2 robots, these 2 droids. And just so happens that one of them has a message from Princess Leia saying that she needs some help, and the robot also has the plans to the Death Star, which is going to be the death of all the planets, right? They could kill any planet. And Luke struggles with, who am I? I'm just this average, ordinary boy. Who am I to go against this big, mighty empire to challenge them? And he meets a mentor called Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan Kenobi mentors him and challenges him. And he goes through, I'm sure everyone except Patty has seen the movie. So lots of different trials, lots of different monsters and things that he has to overcome. And I'm just, for the sake of time, then just going to fast forward to the most iconic part of the movie, where he flies in the spaceship, the X-Wing fighter, down the little tunnel of the Death Star, and is able to shoot the rockets or the charges down into the one vulnerable spot of the Death Star, and then blow it up, and then comes and saves the day. So that's his final mastery of the problem. So yeah, a great way to put it, probably a quintessential story for the hero's journey, Patty.
Yeah. And you can see what Mark said. He just was this average boy, this average person going through the ordinary world. And he was, for whatever reason, called to this adventure. And he went through his own trials and tribulations, but look what he accomplished, right? He blew up the Death Star. So thank you for sharing that, because as you know, I'm not familiar with the story, but I am familiar with the story in many, books and other movies, but my own personal story. So we've all been through these things, and I think it makes us nervous to share them because it makes us feel vulnerable. But in the end, when others see that you, an ordinary person, have accomplished and overcome something so great, it gives them the courage to go on their own journey as well. So what I challenge you to do is to take a look at that hero's journey, the hero's cycle, and see what story you can share. What have you gone through? And sometimes you might have to think about a few, because some of them might be too personal, so you got to be careful sometimes when you're at work, but start sharing even small stories about what you've overcome. And then you can also share stories about what you've helped other teams do. So your current teams can see, well, if that team did it, yeah, so can we. So I thought, push it out there today. Does anybody want to share a story, right? Maybe you've practiced it, so you're really comfortable. But does anybody want to share a quick hero's journey to inspire people to follow in your footsteps?
Hi. Don't know if you can hear me. Yes. Okay. Hi. My name is Alina. I'm from Germany. I wouldn't call it a hero story, but a struggle story with a happy ending. I don't know if it's classified for hero story. So my journey as a Scrum Master started last year. I am in a government organization. It's a traditional way, and they decided to start a project where a couple of teams work in a safe model, and I was there. So I took the Scrum Master role, and I had no training, and every single day was a struggle to find out answers, because we are not building software, but a cloud platform. So I was reading article after article. There was no sustainability at that point. And nights after night, watching videos and so on and so on, I literally became this alien with like 1,000 eyes to see everything, read all the books that they were there, with 100 ears to watch videos, to listen to podcasts, and it went to such a level that I couldn't sleep more than an hour or two per night, because it was so interesting, and I found myself and I saw the values that it brought. They were aligning with my values. And the more I read, the more I wanted to know, till it reached a moment of collapse. And I wanted to take a book, and my brain said, no, you won't do that. It's too much. And the thing that helped me was I took part in the Agile Online Summit last year in 2022. And I know Mark has been there in 2021 that I missed, sorry, but I've seen your video. And that was the thing which turned everything around. I learned about sustainability. I learned to take care about myself. I learned resilience. I learned about happiness. I learned how to help my team. And if I don't help myself, I cannot help my team. So this is kind of my journey and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's not easy coming in front of a group of strangers and sharing something, but you can see you went through such a huge struggle. And it worked out okay. You're here to tell the story, right?
Yes, I survived.
Right? And that's inspiring to other people, because there are a lot of people who get thrown in very similar situations, and it's overwhelming, and you want to quit, and you have to just keep going and be around people that can rally you to keep going, right? All the mentors, all the people that helped you. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know I want to keep an eye on our time. The bottom line here, just going back to build a bridge of familiarity. Find something familiar in the new way of doing things. Build a bridge from the old, what people are used to doing, to the new. Help others see this bridge, because sometimes there's so much going on, we can't even see the answer in front of us. The baby steps, and then tell your own stories about crossing the bridge to inspire them to come along with you. And I found this picture. This is from a few years ago. This is in San Francisco. I'm from the East Coast. I've been there a couple of times since then, but I was very shocked at how long this bridge is. So I decided to walk it. It took a long time. I couldn't believe it. But in looking down, I realized in order to get from one side to the other side here, people slaved for many years to build this, to help us out, the people that came after them. I also did, as I was telling Mark, I did a tour of Alcatraz, and I realized there's no one that's going to survive swimming in the San Francisco Bay. The sharks are going to get you. So this bridge is critical. And I share this because it's not always easy to do this work. It's not easy to put yourself out there, to go first, to test the water, so to speak, to tiptoe out, kind of like Indiana Jones, right? What was that in the one where like you had to cross the canyon and he threw the dirt out and the path appeared? It's not easy. Sometimes we don't see the path, we don't see the bridge, and we have to do our own baby steps. But once people see it's safe, once they realize they're going to be okay with these changes, with Scrum, with agility, etc., they see you survived it, they will come to trust you. So when you tell them the next thing that they need to do, the next change that's about to occur, there'll be less resistance because they'll remember the story you told them. So this is what I wanted to leave you with today. I know that we have a couple of moments here for questions and answers. I will stop sharing my screen and you can feel free to throw those at me.
I don't know. Is this how it works? Do I need to raise hand?
Sure, I can see you, so yes.
The first time I'm doing this, so thank you. I wanted to ask about the scientific method. Would that apply to an organization level, so not team level? Because right now, I really want to bring more agility to the whole company, not only the little project where we are right now. And I've been talking to some people. I have tried to get some answers, but would such thing work scaled to organization level?
That's a good question. So I'm going to be a good coach. I'm going to say, what do you think about that?
I think I want to try it out.
Well, I think the thing is that it's a method that you can use to solve a problem. And the problem is in the form of a question. So whether you have a small problem on your team, such as everybody's complaining there are too many meetings with Scrum, we don't want to, we can't possibly do this, right? What's the question? The question isn't why are there too many meetings in Scrum, right? Because they're all there for a specific purpose. It's what are we doing now that's not working? Right? Are these meetings effective that we are currently doing? Why or why not? That might be a more appropriate question to ask. But that's on a team level, right? If you go into an organizational challenge, what would that be? I don't know. Not that we have to, decompose this right here now, but do you have an organizational question that people are asking?
Yeah, I think they're asking, how did you do it? Because it worked for you, not for all the teams. We want to know. And would that actually work for others? Maybe you did something there, but we don't know if it works for others. But the moment you said build this bridge to familiarity, I was, yes, that's exactly how it needs to be done.
So I have this book right here. I'm like, this guy needs to pay me some cash because I bring this up to everybody. It is so good. It is, right? Because the question is, would this work for us? It worked for you. Would it work for us? Right? You have all this background research, which could be you sharing how it did or didn't work. And then people could say, well, okay, of all this background research and all these stories I've heard, we're going to try this to see if this works, right? And then they do the experiment. So of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
I will try it.
You answered your own question.
Thank you so much for sharing.
All right. Anybody else? Force unmute here. Michelle, I was going to just say, Mark, it's a good thing I was muted. Mark, I'm not seeing any questions. Michelle, your hand's up.
I'm wondering if besides the fear of experimenting, we have also to consider another, say, human attitude that is very spread, which is the tendency to bet. betting is part of our life. Okay, we love games with some money betting some money for an hypothesis not scientifically demonstrable. Okay, and this is something that is interesting for me to consider whether this is another perspective. Instead of saying you are doing an experiment, you are doing a bet. So, of course, if you bet a very small amount, your risk is small, but also your gain is small. Instead, if you are interested to break the rules and go further, probably you have to bet something more, but also perceive that there is a reward. So this is another approach, in my opinion, besides the experiment in the say scientific approach, where you have all the variables under control. In the bet, typically is the typical situation also of the business. You don't have all the parameters under control. Probably there are even some parameters that are not knowable at all. Not just is lack of your knowledge, is a real lack of availability of some, for instance, the weather. We cannot forecast the weather, or some is not missing some parameter in the equation. We don't have the equation for weather forecasting. So this is my question here. It is probably out of your team, but is somehow related to the fear of experimenting.
I think so, because there are people that are very risk averse out there. When you talk about taking bets, you think of money, right? You play the lottery or whatever it might be. There are definitely people that are afraid of that. But to your point, at some level, there are things you don't know, and you have to take a risk. And I think that's it's a great point to bring that up, because as you're going through the scientific method with your team, where do we get stuck? We don't know all the information. So we have to take an educated guess as to what to do based on what's available to us. And it can feel scary. So I think it does go back to fear, but it's definitely something that needs to be factored into what you're doing.
I think it all ties back to
Yeah.
complex work where we don't know what we don't know. Right, Patty?
Right. And I think we have to be, just careful to acknowledge that and say, we can't let that take us into analysis paralysis. If there are pieces that we don't know, we have to take a risk, and we're going to take a bet on this and go this way. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. We're going to stop quickly and we're going to take a bet on this and go this way. Yeah. It's all tied together. And thank you for recommending that book. I have heard of that book, Annie Dukes. This is like poker, right?
Yeah, she's a world famous poker star, and it translates into product development, especially complex domains.
Yeah. All right, Mark, I want to check on it. Oh, we are overtime.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
All right. Yet another great session, Patty. Thank you so much. This was awesome. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. I put some links in the chat. Let me try to chase those down again really, really quick on how to get in touch with Patty. If you want to, if you have follow-up questions, Patty's always really good about reaching out to her and responding. There you go, her LinkedIn profile and her website. Also, if you want to be involved in the Scrum Simulator, that's another thing that she offers. So I'll leave those comments or those links there for you. And we're going to land it there because we're out of time. So Patty, thank you so much again. Great job. We appreciate it.
Thank you so
Listen,
much.
Hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye, folks.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.